Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of This is HCD. My name is Jerry Scullion, I'm a service designer, I'm an educator, and I'm based in the wonderful city of Dublin, Ireland. We are edging so close to our millionth download, and it's all thanks to you, our listeners and viewers, for listening, for sharing, for promoting, and ultimately supporting us on our journey over the last 6 years. It's hard to believe. If you want to go one step further and become part of our ecosystem, we'd love you to become a premium subscriber of This is HCD. All the money goes back and we reinvest it into building out our ecosystem, helps support things like Change Space, our private community for change makers, and really helps us ultimately keep the lights on. So thank you so much for almost 1 million downloads so far. Today in the show we speak with Carol Massa. Carol Massa is a phenomenal service designer based in the US, and in this episode we speak about the nuances between strategic design and service design and really get into the weeds about the two and how Carol sees some of the organizations that have successfully embedded, what are the things that they've done to introduce service design into the organization. Carol's a phenomenal educator. She works with the Service Design Network, runs a great course over there called Strategic Design in Organizations. We talk about the key learnings from that course in particular. I had a lot of fun speaking with Carol. I'm going to put a link to Carol's profile on LinkedIn so you can connect with her and stay up to date with everything to do with Carol Massa. Let's jump straight into this episode. I know you're going to enjoy it. Carol Massa, delighted to have you on the show. We've been back and forth for the last couple of months, I think it is, since we set this one up. But maybe we'll start off for our listeners. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and what you do.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. This is very exciting. My name is Carol Massa, and for the past 10 years, I've been working in design. I
Yeah,
started in graphics, went to advertising, and the last 7 years, I transitioned to strategic design, service design. And I
nice.
worked in Fortune 500 companies here in the United States, really helping enable that shift of mindset from an operational standpoint to a human centered
Mm.
standpoint. And then for the past couple of years, I actually decided to focus in one industry to really, you know, hold into the practice and make a career out of it, which is in healthcare. So I've been in
Awesome.
healthcare and now it's going to be my third year, which
Yeah.
is very exciting.
So on that journey there that you mentioned there, you worked in advertising, and it seems to be um, a lot of people that I've spoken to over the last maybe 5, 6 years, they've worked in advertising at some point, and then they kind of have a moment, and then they move on to something that's a little bit more closer to their purpose.
Right.
Was that a journey that you went on?
For sure. Yes. So during my couple of years in that industry, I my initial impression was that I would just, change the world through campaigns and communication design, right? When you're
Disruption.
young,
Yeah.
you always feel like the visual part of advertising changes minds, right?
Yeah.
But when I got to to actually experience it, it became very mechanical
Mm.
and not that much of the artistic, world changing piece that I was looking
What actually happens in advertising? Because there's people out there listening to the podcast who are, might be from a marketing or an advertising, even just students looking to learn a little bit more. And what we're going to be talking today is about strategic design in organizations. But I'd love to get your perspective on what was actually happening within the advertising space. You said there that was very mechanical, but and you spoke about the visual, but how do you interpret and how do you kind of process that in your mind now that you've kind of moved on from that part of your life?
Yeah, I so there is a lot in terms of so I refer to the mechanical piece
Yeah,
because we always think advertising is something you can just create that campaign, right? From
yeah,
the brilliant ideas that come up in a brainstorming session. However, the the industry of advertising, there is actually a lot of rules in terms of coloring, in terms of processing colors and printing. So that really enabled me to really expand and see how technical and mechanical it is.
Yeah.
And because I was directing campaigns, I had to follow a certain um, pattern of design. So it didn't allow me necessarily to experiment. And that's the part that I like the most. And that's why I've been doing strategic design, where we can
Hmm.
experiment and really push that thinking um, in any shape or form and any level, right? Or
So let's talk about that type of design you just said there. So, what is that type of design? Because you've titled it strategic design, and I'd love to know a little bit more around the nuances or the differences between strategic design and, say, service design. Or is there any differences, do you think?
yeah, and that's a very personal answer that
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
about to share because it has to do with my experience and how I've been shaping my skills
sure.
to do this type of work. So I use actually both terms, strategic design and service design,
Yeah,
very
interchangeably.
constantly,
Yeah,
almost yes, um, because when we're designing for experiences, when we're designing for services, we are we are taking a different take on what that design artifact looks like because we're designing for, and I'm going to quote a book here, design for the invisible. So
yeah,
we're designing for the things that people actually don't see because we're designing the mechanisms, right? And the interconnectivities of different pieces of a service to come together and people to experience that and gain from it.
yeah,
And yeah, so that's how I shape that skill. And it's something that not every organization is ready for it or it's not set up for that.
yeah,
Um, and that's also part of what I've been educating and
absolutely.
evangelizing.
So you mentioned there like the Fortune 500 businesses that you've been fortunate enough to work with. Do you think it's a case that businesses that already have an existing design function that might be a design for decoration kind of approach to thinking about design, do you think it can evolve from that existing function, or does it require some sort of radical rethinking and getting some sort of external consultation? Or what's your thoughts on the best approaches to get them from A to C almost?
Yeah, how much time we have?
Yeah, well, we do have time, so that's one of the luxury of that.
Okay, so
I know how
let's
long is a piece of string as well, and I know like every business is different, but generally speaking,
yeah,
if you have an organization that really sort of encourages and respects, that whole kind of advertising mindset, the marketing mindset, and then you're getting them closer to strategic and service thinking, can it evolve from that world? Do you believe?
yeah. So let me see if I can kind of break down
Yeah,
the nuances of the question here. So I would say the first thing when you mentioned is there a way for organizations that have a setup design team to evolve to do
yeah,
strategic design work? Uh, I think for that to happen, it's really going to depend on what type of value you want to deliver. Companies, for example, automotive, right? There is a value there that you can shape into a service very, very easily because you're not only getting a car, you're, transporting yourself to that dream car, right? So there's
yeah.
a lot of emotional, functional value that you can deliver when designing for that service.
Mhm.
The interesting thing about healthcare, and I'll speak to my experience because I feel like it's a good comparison here from a very mechanical automotive to healthcare. So in healthcare, the value it's not something that it's perceived because you're seeking help. So
Yeah,
to design for that, it has to be strategic in nature. I don't think there's a way for healthcare just to and I'm not talking about the marketing department that does the campaigns and
yeah,
social media. I'm talking about the ways in which we're designing the actual experience of you going to an appointment or
yeah,
you're doing a telehealth visit. So all of that is very strategic because you're going through something very emotional and very heavy in terms of um, what you're trying to find, you may not have an answer to because
Yeah.
sometimes in health you cannot find a diagnosis. So there's all these constraints and complexities of the human, body that you're treating that in a service. And that for me is very exciting. And I don't see how strategic design is not embedded in
Yeah.
health in that way.
So they can be used interchangeably, is what you're
Oh,
saying. So yeah,
yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Especially if you're doing this type of work where value is being translated into something that it's very complex, right?
Yeah.
Emotionally complex, functionally complex, and you don't actually get one artifact out of
Mm,
it. You actually get a set of things that makes you feel something or makes you experience
yeah.
something.
There was an illustration that I saw that I believe you created, that I thought was really interesting with the personal bias at the center of it. Do you want to talk to us a little bit more around the origins of that visualization or that illustration, where it came about, and what the factors are that are included in it as well? And I'll put a link to it in the show notes, folks, so you can click in and have a look at it at the same time.
Sure. So that visual was actually one of the first visuals I created for the strategic design and organizations course I teach
Yeah,
virtually at the SDN Service Design at Work Academy. And that course actually came from a gap that I saw that designers that are transitioning to do the type of work we're talking about here don't necessarily take the time to put themselves into a context, a personal context and the overall context of where they came from, and overall context where they sit in the organization. So
yeah,
there's a lot of I would say almost reflection work that we don't get to do when you go from you just graduated and you start working. So you just go into this action plan of getting things done and you don't get the time to reflect. So that visual represents a lot of almost a pause moment in your what you're doing, where you are, where you're coming from to really understand where you're sitting and what type of design can you actually be comfortable designing. And sorry for the
yeah.
um, yeah, because if you're not aware of who you are in terms of what you can bring to the table, it's going to be really hard for you to identify where you're working and where you want to live and what type of professional you want to be, because those two are very interconnected and interlinked.
Yeah. So walk me through. It's like I'm seeing a thread in my mind here at the moment from your own personal journey into where you're at now, and you're talking about this stuff. Um, Coming from advertising into healthcare, what are the practices that you've uh, implemented into your own life that helped you align closer towards those purposes? Because you don't land in healthcare, one of the most, I guess, dysfunctional, especially in the US. What was that journey like for you?
What I had to kind of create my
Yeah.
own way to to
I mean,
healthcare.
it's similar
Um,
to what I went on, like, over the last decade, but I'd love to hear any recommendations, any books, things that worked that didn't work.
yeah, so there is definitely a thread, and I'm not sure if it has to do with healthcare, but it definitely has to do growing as a professional in this field,
Yeah,
which is related to networking. I cannot stress enough how networking gets you to where you want to go.
that's networking, not working. It just came across. And
I'm sorry,
not
networking is like,
working does an awful
no,
lot for you as well, but networking is even better.
yeah, correct. Yes,
Yeah,
networking. Sorry for my
yeah,
articulation here. Um,
good.
so for networking is something that it's a practice and you actually have to take the time to do it.
Yeah,
And I don't think some professionals understand how much they can gain from that
mm,
interaction. And I'm not talking about going to conferences only or
yeah,
having, conversations or just publishing something and people interact with it. I'm talking about really expanding your network beyond countries and have people you can talk to from anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, where people come from, and from the course that I teach, it's a global audience, and the patterns of struggles and challenges, they are the same. And it's so interesting to see that the questions that come up are very similar.
Yeah.
What they're trying to do is very similar because we're all humans and we're all working for organizations. Of course, we're going to see patterns across the world. However, there's so much value in to see how people approach and actually articulate how they solve for problems, which is different. There are
Yeah.
nuances there that you pick up, and it's very helpful for you to absorb that and create your own way, your own vision, your own point of view of just doing your work. And that
Yeah.
really helps talk things through.
Do you think, and this is a kind of an open-ended question, but typically in the Fortune 500 businesses, the outcome is growth, increased sales, increased metrics around that. When you bring people together from a diverse background, those outcomes can be different. Okay, so the outcomes in government could be ensuring the quality of the service, whatever it is. With those two variances in the outcomes, do the factors for success change? Do the ingredients change for strategic design and service design to evolve? Are those criteria similar? Or yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on that a little bit more because it's something it plays in my mind. It's not a recipe book that everyone can just follow and it works. Depending on the organizational outcome and what they're trying to achieve, surely the factors um, kind of differ as well, and the ingredients change.
Right. And I worked in companies that you can consider them to be global companies,
Yeah,
especially in telecommunications and you could say consumer goods retail,
yeah.
like beverage company. Right.
Coke was it?
It's fine. Been a while. I think they'll be okay by now.
Yeah,
So in that scale of work, you're not only so the strategic design there, I think it becomes even more valuable because people are used to because everything is such a large scale and everybody's doing their piece of the
yeah,
work, they're not used to break out of that daily job. Healthcare, same thing.
yeah,
I live in New York. You go to Queens. I think you hear 6 to 7 languages in as you walk 10 steps.
yeah,
So, it's something that you have to become almost an expert of awareness, right? To do the
sure.
that definitely brings that very as far as a team
Yeah,
that builds with time, right?
okay. So the strategic design in organizations course that you're running at the moment, um, obviously like, the whole kind of industry is evolving at the moment, especially in the US. I know there's a lot of people moving, and I think there's still a large amount of people exiting organizations that they're just after the pandemic and so forth. How is strategic design evolving in the US? Like it's because the industry is changing all the time. How are you seeing it? Because you started giving this course in 2020, mid-pandemic, is it?
Yep.
Or maybe first year of the pandemic? I can't remember.
It was yeah,
I don't even know who I am anymore.
it was April 2020, yes.
April 2020. I think it was March 2020 in Ireland, but I think the US were like, "Oh, we're not sure." Yeah, 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 it's definitely here.
Oh, I
So,
meant the course. I
but
started
the
the course.
course, yeah, exactly. I'm like, "Oh, we've got differing dates when the pandemic started." But what does it look like from your perspective, and what are you watching for at the moment to include? Because I know you're going to be running that course again, and again, I have no affiliation with the SDN or the course or any of that kind of stuff, but it looks really interesting. What are you looking at now at the moment as factors that could be included in that course?
From a US market evolution perspective.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, from the moment I started until now, the participants that interact with me in this course, they look for different things. So in
Yeah,
the beginning was more of a definition. What is service design? What do we
yeah,
do? What are the principles? And now the evolution for professional, I'll talk the professional side first for
mm,
actually practitioners and then like the actual application of that, which is
Yeah.
they kind of live in different levels, in my opinion. So, from a professional standpoint, what I see the practitioners looking for now is to really connect their practice to sustainability, systems thinking. So, they're really trying to expand the maturity of what design, strategic design, or service design can do in a much larger scale so that it can have a larger impact. And
Mm.
I think the going out to the market perspective, the market, especially government, like digital services here in the US, they have the US Digital Services. They have an amazing service design team that is helping reshape specific digital interactions for the
Yeah.
entire country. So I see a lot of that strategic work really moving to this, uh, I would say, community national impact type of thinking to do something that means something. Because, you're trying to, as a designer, you want to, you know, I'll bring that child dream back here again. You want to change the world. You want to help
Yeah.
people think differently, live differently, experience things differently. So
Sure.
I think moving to that social impact aspect is something that I've seen evolve.
Mm.
And it's something that I also feel like the pandemic, in a way, accelerated that because people started thinking about justice and,
Yeah.
all the social determinant of
Yeah.
dynamics that you see in a society. And I think that woke up people to a different type of mindset.
Yeah. Can I talk to you a little bit more around that visualization? Because
Sure.
the more I look at it, the more I like it. And I'm not going to look at it anymore because I don't want to fall in love. Um, but like, well, it's a joke, bad joke. Anyway, so in the middle of it, you got the personal biases, but in the top part of the circle, you've got resources, structure, culture, and time. Walk me through how would you explain this? You put it on the wall. How should it be used?
Right. So this is actually again almost like a reflection exercise that I
Yeah.
ask to think through this. Uh, but the reason why there are two layers, the one on the top, it's very almost top down, right? Time,
Yeah.
culture, structure, resources, and then you take almost like a deep dive into your own universe, which is community, decision makers, policies, and environment.
Yeah.
So the idea here is there you are inserted is pretty much to read like this. You are inserted in a specific time of your life, right? Working being part of this culture, working a specific social, economical infrastructure, and you have specific resources available to you because you're part of this culture and this infrastructure that you have above you.
This
Uh,
organization, that's ecosystem.
it could be the organization. Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
And what happens also is when you start to compare how service designers do this type of work across the world, they're going to have different infrastructures and
Mm.
different resources on top of the culture of that country. So, really breaking down those levels, you start to realize that some um, some design communities might actually have to push for more innovative ways to do work because they may not have enough infrastructure or resources to do the work.
Yeah.
It's simple as that in a way. And then when you get to the different layers underneath of community, decision makers, policy, and environment, you really start to think about, okay, now that I'm inserted in this mega, universe, I still have the community, my neighbors, the people that work with me every day, my coworkers, right? We are bound within people that make decisions for us. We don't make decisions about financial,
Yeah.
takes on the company, but that's going to happen regardless, right? We don't make decisions about policies that are being made about things that are happening in
Sure.
terms of time off. I'm just giving
Yeah.
like silly examples, but that's just to illustrate. And we are not part of we're not part of making decisions about the environment that we're going to be working on.
Mhm.
We may be asked for recommendations, but there are people that are not us. They're making all these decisions to set up the environment and
Yeah.
the ecosystem for you to work in.
Yeah.
And you then come in with your own bias, your own experience to try to find interesting ways to adapt, right?
Yeah.
And to actually immerse in this entire layered universe.
So is it an evaluative framework then that you can basically have participants or have stakeholders place where they see the problems? What's
I
how are you
haven't
what's the application
used
you've used?
like that. I think
Mm,
that's a great idea. I
all right,
have
that one's for
this
free.
this was mostly created for design practitioners to take
Yeah.
time and really analyze, okay, we cannot we for us to assume that we are controlling the design of things is not fair
Yeah.
because there are so many layers around us that are dictating from a top down, bottom up
Mm,
ways in which we're going to do the work.
yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
the interesting mix there.
I remember, and this is not me kind of like trying to weave into a situation of power here, but I remember I had a similar map years ago called Horizon to Action. And I love your one is much better than the one I had. It was an early draft to try and articulate the certain aspects of a service, like in
Mhm.
time and interactions and so forth. But this one here looks very close to a stakeholder map. Okay, and this is the reason why I was asking
Gotcha.
um, was how you're using it, how it's being applied within an organization. It makes sense that it's from the practitioner's perspective, but I love having. I think there's a risk there by having it just from the practitioner's perspective. But I love having the externals, the executives feed into it and being able to problem identify. What are the intersecting points of a problem where they believe it could be, and that's how I initially saw it. I was like, "Oh, this is
Wow.
nice," because it's like a cake piece. It might be, like, thicker on the decision makers, it might be thicker in policy, it might be thinner in environment. So you can actually do plot a graph on it. That's how I initially saw it, and I was like, "Oh, this is kinda what I'm talking about," because for the last year or 2, I guess, during the pandemic, I was really into complexity theory. I still am. And that whole understanding of systems thinking as regards how we approach problem solving or our craft of service design within organizations. And too often, I believe, we treat these complex situations with complicated approaches. And what I like about what you're doing here is you're talking and you're kind of you're opening the box for those conversations to happen. That's the way I see it, and I'm hearing it as well. So kudos to you. Am I on the right page and as regards that was your intent with the illustration, or am I completely talking,
Oh my gosh, no, I what I love about, just again, going back to networking and just talking through some ideas and application of things that we see gaps on is to have the ability to evolve what you
yeah,
have intentionally designed.
yeah,
Uh, I could definitely see a very interesting exercise with, for example, CTO putting
for
themselves in
sure.
the middle.
I mean, as a precursor to a workshop,
Right.
having this, plotted on a kind of like a target, if you know what I mean, where you see the problems and then play it back on where everyone saw the problems within a workshop environment. I guarantee you'd see the
Different.
problem identification space being
Yeah.
like, oh well, we think it's this, we think it's that, and it becomes a really powerful alignment tool.
Yeah, and
Um,
I wonder how it would, there's actually, the click down, the slide for the cloud.
Beyond, which
This
I
one
don't get access to.
is actually, many of these circles popping up
Ah, there you
because
go.
in the
Got to do the course to
organization
see that, folks. I only get the free preview.
like, okay,
That's
so
cool.
you do like, the idea is, okay, now that you've realized and identified what is your micro universe and what's going on in there,
Yeah,
the entire organization is doing the same because
yeah,
organizations are made by people and for people.
yeah. That's
So
true.
that layer of human complexity, I think for designers, that's a gap I see. We don't
Mm,
take the time to try to understand because we're so into let's let's get to work. Let's do the
Yeah.
work.
I've got the spade in my hand. Let's start digging.
Yeah, and
And
I'm not talking about, like, slowing down the project or, like, backtracking the project. I'm just talking about taking a few moments to realize and go through this almost checklist in your head. Are
yeah,
we thinking about this in different layers? Are we
yeah,
considering the state all of the different types of stakeholders and dynamics for this project, for this experience?
sure.
But it starts with you, right? So that's why it's very, like, the personal bias, it's in the center because it starts with
Yeah. Starts with you. So just going back to one of the questions I asked probably, earlier, is your own journey through that to self-identification, and you talked about networking be really important. Totally agree. Networking is one of the most powerful things you can do for your career, and also just getting diverse perspectives and speaking to people from different parts of the business. What other things have worked for you to kind of go, you know, I am Carol Massa. I am, who I am, and I know that I'm going to do a good job for Northwell, where you're currently at now at the moment. What does that look like in terms of a practice? Do you do daily practices? Do you do monthly practices? Do you do yearly practices? This is the stuff that I'm really interested in. For me personally, don't worry about the listeners. It's just between me and you. So, what
it.
does it look like? What are you doing?
So I'll tell you my secret. That's
Come
lazy,
on, hit
right?
me.
So I actually borrow a lot of things from rocket science.
Oh,
I I
okay.
I, I set myself a couple of minutes a day just to look, into NASA
Right.
and to really look at anything related to rocket science and how people are coming together.
Yeah.
People on the moon and in Mars, and for me, it's something that passion has grown almost like a layer
Exponentially. Yeah.
underneath of this because there's so much from science that we can learn, and especially that type of complicated and complex problem solving.
Mm,
Try to see how much of it can actually be translated into a human dynamic. Because
yeah.
in organizations, it's human dynamic. We're not taking a technical thing anywhere, right? We're
True.
just trying to evolve something that people interact with that it's different. I
Yeah.
understand the difference, but for me, I get so much inspiration from that type of, approach
Yeah.
and
Material.
our material and,
It's
I
fun. Yeah, it's funny on that. I'm hopefully speaking to Dave Snowden in a couple of weeks from, one of the complexity
yes,
theory, one
Griffin.
of one of the
Right.
pioneers.
Yep.
And whenever you read some Dave Snowden stuff, he talks about. I was reared like looking at NASA, like their most incredible, the things that they've done, and we just naturally assume that they'd be complex. But if you look at Dave Snowden's descriptions of things, that's a complicated
Oh, yeah.
approach because it's able to be broken down and understood, and
Right.
it's reciprocal, so you can actually do the same thing and get the same output. Whereas when complex, we're in organizations and human beings, they are complex. And one of my friends, Melissa Nova, has a really nice sort of story on that, where she said her boy, because human beings are completely like they're complex beings. You could be at
Unpredictable.
unpredictable, 7 o'clock in the kitchen. One morning they could want Cocoa Pops. 7 o'clock the next morning they could want a hamburger and fries. It's two unknowns,
Right.
and that's the nature of what we're trying to do. What are your thoughts? And this is probably going to be one of my last questions, so then you can breathe a big sigh of relief. Um, what are your thoughts around the limitations of service design and strategic design? And are we at that point where we really need to rethink and include other disciplines for where we're at?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think my opinion is service design and practitioners are at a point that they think they could do the job by themselves.
Yeah.
as they are equipped with the tools so they can do anything. They
Yeah.
can use a blueprint to change the entire process.
Yeah.
The problem is that's not how organizations work.
Yeah.
It's not going to be one blueprint, one session, one interview that it's going to change things. And
Absolutely.
that's why that understanding of how things work from any microcosm level
Yeah.
is very important because you as a service designer and the practice itself needs to evolve to be uh, almost the expert of multidisciplinary
Yeah.
uh, act
Completely.
of you know, dot dot dot. It can be anything because if it's multidisciplinary, you're borrowing the expertise of the company, of the organization, and
Yeah.
you're helping people to think differently together
Yeah. Totally.
instead of having no design is going to solve everything. Nope.
No, 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 no.
Well,
We're
and
experimenters.
that's where I think the main challenge is today.
Yeah. So it's one of the challenges we have as well with community-based activities where we look at case studies and people do talks and they're like, "That's great. We're going to bring exactly the same thing and drop it into our organization and expect to
Mhm.
get the same result." It's not. It's just an experiment. It's just everything that we're doing are professional experimenters, really. At the end of the day, like see what works and measure it, and let's move ahead. Multi-experiment is how I like to phrase it.
Yeah,
But
there's
look,
some authors that use multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary.
hmm
I'm not gonna be, you know, the judge of that, but I do believe that this expansion of practice still hasn't happened.
yeah,
I think it's pretty much
we're on that point.
egocentric at this point.
There's an emerging ego from within large parts of the design community globally, and consultancies generally have that ego and that relationship to sell in that belief system into clients who don't know any better. And it's one of the pieces. It needs to come with a sense of humility. And there's some people out there talking about it, but I believe it's something that we can all probably reflect on an awful lot more and start encouraging and nudging those conversations within the organization. That maybe we're not going to save the day. Maybe we're going to be just like anyone else, trying to improve the system.
Yeah. I mean, I don't wanna end on a note that
Yeah,
I don't
on a
believe in
bummer,
design.
on a bummer note.
Um, but I do believe that design brings a different perspective to
Yes.
the table that people are not used to think about it because they're very focused on their daily work.
Yeah.
So we have that power to be that catalyst or a facilitator or a guide, right?
Yeah. That is true. The facilitator of the conversations.
Right.
Um, and it's
And that
one of our superstars.
and if you bring the rocket science together, you're good.
Yeah. Well, look, Carol, I know you're big on LinkedIn. You love it. You're like me, a LinkedIner. Rah, 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 rah. What are the other places where people can reach out and connect with you and learn more about the work that you're doing at Northwell and generally about the courses that you're running?
Yeah, so, I would say first and foremost, hit me up on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
But then I'm also a service design practitioner. So you can find me as a SDN accredited service designer at the
yeah,
SDN.org
yeah,
community. I'm always available for virtual coffees. I'll put
yeah,
that in the air and see who would like to reach out for virtual coffees.
yeah,
That's something that I get, a lot of, value and enjoyment.
yeah.
Um,
What's
and
the
I, Mhm.
go on, I was gonna say, what's the New York service design scene like? Because I know that
Yeah,
you worked with Patrick in Harmonic,
right.
and Atlanta looks like there's some cool stuff happening down there. But the New York scene and the service design network scene, I know Antonio was there as well. What's it like at the moment in terms of the maturity of the organizations looking for service designers?
I will have to get back to you on that because I just got here a month ago.
Oh,
Uh,
okay, right. So you're relatively new to New York. Well, look,
I am new to New York. However, I do know Natalie, who is the founder of the chapter
yeah.
of New York chapter. I'm actually having dinner with her.
Well,
Just said that, so everybody
there
will
you
know.
go.
Or cut that out.
So, so if anyone in New York is in the design scene and wants to, make Carol feel welcome, check them
Yeah.
out on LinkedIn and add them and, you know, make coffee plans, even if it's online, whatever it is. Like, they're new to the city. So someday I'd like to get I've never been to New York. It's one of those places
Oh,
that I'd love to get to someday, but
yes. We'll be
who
happy
knows?
to have you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, get the little airplanes out and get Jerry over there, Well, look, it was absolutely fantastic. I like to end all the episodes with thanking the guests for their energy, their vulnerability, their openness, putting themselves on the spot. It takes, time out of your day to do these things. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about the work that you're doing. I know the listeners are going to find it really, really interesting. So thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you for everything. This has been awesome. And I'm really excited to see, you know, what else is there and how practitioners and the work of service design will keep evolving because that's what we do.
Awesome.